Hello everyone, this is Shriti. Welcome to Learnwizz. I hope you're all doing well. In today's video, we are going to dive into the fifth chapter in biology for 10th grade CBSE, which is life processes. Make sure you stay till the end for some amazing tips and tricks that you won't want to miss. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell icon so you never miss an update from us. Now, let's get started. Ever wondered how your body knows when to eat, breathe, or even eliminate waste? Just like a car needs fuel, maintenance, and cooling, our bodies needs constant internal process to keep running. In this video, we'll decode the most important biology chapter from Class 10 CBSE life processes with real life examples and questions that will make you exam ready. So let's dive into the question. What are life processes? All living organisms perform certain vital activities to sustain life. These are called life processes. So let's go into the definition of life process. Life processes are the basic functions performed by living organisms to maintain their life, such as nutrition, respiration, transportation, excretion, growth, reproduction, and response to stimuli. So I have developed a mnemonic so that you remember all these processes, and it is known as Mrs. Gren. MRSGREN. M stands for movement, R stands for respiration, S stands for sensitivity or the sense to stimuli, G stands for growth, R stands for reproduction, E stands for excretion, and N stands for nutrition. So, in the case of single-celled organism, no specific organs for taking in food, exchange of gases, or removal of waste may be needed because the entire surface of the organism is in contact with the environment. But in multicellular organisms like humans, various body parts have been specialized functions to perform. So let's move into the main important topic, which is nutrition. So, what is nutrition? Nutrition is the process of intake of food and its conversion into energy. And why do we need energy at all? Energy is needed to maintain a state of order in our body or an individual organism. The energy comes from outside the body, so there must be a process of transfer, a source of energy from outside the body called food into inside. And that is where nutrition comes into play. So we have two types of nutrition, which is the autotrophic nutrition and the heterotrophic nutrition. So what are autotrophs? What are heterotrophs? We'll discuss now. Some organisms use simple food materials obtained from inorganic sources in the form of carbon dioxide and water. So these organisms are called autotrophs. The examples of such autotrophs are plants and some bacteria. Now, other organisms depend directly or indirectly on autotrophs for nutrition, and those organisms are called heterotrophs. So the examples for these kind of organisms are humans and certain kind of fungi. So, autotrophic nutrition. Autotrophic nutrition in plants is fulfilled by a process called photosynthesis, in which the plants take in substances from outside and convert them into stored forms of energy. So first we'll discuss the inputs. The photosynthesis process is being put in formula, which is carbon dioxide plus water in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll gives you glucose, oxygen, and water. So what are the inputs and outputs? In the form of carbon dioxide and water. So the carbon dioxide and water is taken through various parts of the body. Carbon dioxide is taken through stomata, whereas water is absorbed by the roots of the plants. So now we'll discuss the of carbo process of photosynthesis. So, the materials taken in the form of carbon dioxide, water is converted into carbohydrates in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll. The carbohydrates, which are not used immediately, are stored in the form of starch, which serves as internal energy reserve. And we have to understand that carbohydrates is the source of energy for plants. So for humans, the energy reserve is in the form of glycogen. What is energy reserve? The energy which is reserved for future use and is not used now. So photosynthesis takes place through three steps. Now let's discuss the various steps in photosynthesis. First is the absorption of light energy by the chlorophyll, light energy in the form of sunlight. Now, next process is the conversion of light energy to chemical energy and splitting of the water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. Here, oxygen is a byproduct and is released by the plants. And now next one is the reduction of carbon dioxide to carbohydrates. Carbohydrates is the source of energy for plants. Now, it is not necessary that all these three processes in photosynthesis take place one after the other. For example, in desert plants, they take up carbon dioxide at night, prepare an intermediate which is acted upon by energy absorbed by chlorophyll during the day. So, how plants obtain carbon dioxide? We already discussed. It is through the tiny pores present on the surface of the leaves called stomata. The opening and closing of these pores is a function of guard cell. The guard cells swell when water flows into them, causing the stomatal pore to open and vice versa. And how water is obtained? It is taken from the soil by roots, which also absorbs certain minerals. So let's consider leaves as the little kitchens where food is made using sunlight, and that's why plants are called producers. So now let's come into the heterotrophic nutrition. So coming into heterotrophic nutrition, we have three categories of animals. So let's go into the first category. Some organisms break down food material outside the body and then absorb it. So such as fungi, bread mold, yeast, and mushrooms. Whereas some organisms take in whole material and break it down inside their bodies. For examples for that is herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores, and we belong to that category. Now, there are still another category of animals which derive nutrition from plants or animals without killing them. And the examples for such organisms are parasites, which includes cuscuta, ticks, lice, leeches, and tapeworms. So now, how do these organisms obtain their nutrition? In single-celled organisms, food may be taken in by the entire surface. For example, in amoeba or in paramecium, they are unicellular organisms and so their entire body is dedicated for all of the processes. But in human beings, there are dedicated organs for each of the process. So, how does nutrition in human beings take place? It is done by the alimentary canal. Alimentary canal is basically a long tube which extends from the mouth to the anus. Now let's concentrate on each of the parts of the digestive system. So mouth or the buccal cavity is where the initial digestion takes place. It helps the food to generate particles which are small and of same texture, and this is achieved via the crushing of food via teeth in mouth. The food is also weighted to make this passage smooth. The food here is also wetted by the process. The food is also wetted to make its passage smooth through the soft alimentary canal. The wetting is done by a fluid called saliva secreted by the salivary amylase. And what is the function of saliva? Let's discuss that. The saliva helps in the wetting of food. That's not just the function of saliva. The saliva contains an enzyme called salivary amylase that breaks down starch to give the simple sugar. Starch is a complex sugar, so it is necessary to break it down into simple sugar, and that is done by the enzyme salivary amylase. So what is an enzyme? Let's discuss that. So the food we ingest is complex in nature, and if food is to be absorbed by the alimentary canal, it has to be broken down into smaller molecules. So this is done with the help of biological catalysts, and those are called enzymes. So the regulation of movement of food through the alimentary canal is controlled by muscles through peristaltic movement. So here we have peristaltic muscles which are aligned, and the food movement is controlled by them. So esophagus is the food pipe which conveys our food from the mouth to the stomach. Stomach is a large organ which expands when food enters it. The muscular walls of stomach help in mixing the food thoroughly with digestive juices secreted by the gastric glands present in the wall of the stomach. So we have three kinds of gastric juices which are secreted in the stomach. One is the HCl, or the hydrochloric acid. Next one is the pepsin, which is a protein digesting enzyme. And next is the mucus. Mucus, the sole purpose of mucus is the protection of the walls of the stomach from the action of acid under normal condition. So the exit of the food from the stomach is regulated by a sphincter muscles. What does this muscle do? It releases it in small amounts to the small intestine. Small intestine is the longest part of the alimentary canal, which is extensively coiled and placed in a compact space. So herbivores eating grass, herbivores eating animals need need larger intestine, as cellulose in grass is harder to digest than the meat. Small intestine is the site of complete digestion of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So it receives secretions from the pancreas and the liver. The food coming from the stomach is acidic and has to be made alkaline for the pancreatic enzymes to act. And this is made sure by the liver. Small intestine receives the juice from liver and pancreas. From the liver, it receives bile juice, and one of the function of bile juice is make the food basic. The food is acidic, which is coming from the stomach, and now it has to make it basic. That is one of the function of bile juice. The other function of bile juice is to break the fat globules into smaller globules, which increases the efficiency of the enzyme action. So what is coming from pancreas? Pancreas, we have pancreatic juice, which consists of two kinds of enzymes. So in pancreatic juice, we have two kinds of enzymes, which is the trypsin and lipase. Okay. So in trypsin is the one enzyme which helps in digestion of protein, and lipase is the other enzyme which helps in breaking down emulsified fats. Now in the intestine, the walls contain glands which secrete intestinal juice. The enzymes present in the intestinal juice convert carbohydrates into glucose, fats into fatty acids, and glycerol, proteins into amino acids. So the digested food is taken up by the walls of the intestine. The inner line, let's say this is the inner lining of the intestine. The inner lining of the intestine has numerous finger-like projections called villi, which increases the area of absorption. The villi is richly supplied with blood vessels, which take the absorbed food to each and every cell of the body. The unabsorbed food is sent into the large intestine, where the walls absorb more water from this material. The rest of the material is removed from the body via the anus and is regulated by anal sphincter. So always remember that the sphincter muscles is present here and also here. These regulate the motion of food or the unwanted products. Now let's dive into the next important process, which is respiration. So what is respiration? The process of acquiring oxygen from outside the body and to use it in the process of breakdown of food sources for cellular needs is what we call respiration. Breakdown of food sources can happen with or without oxygen. In all cases, the first step is the breakdown of glucose. So what is glucose? It is a 6-carbon molecule and it is broken down into 3-carbon molecule called pyruvate. And this process takes place in the cytoplasm. So further, pyruvate may be converted into ethanol and carbon dioxide in the absence of oxygen. So if you look into the first formula, we can see that this process is done in yeast and the fermentation is an example of that. Since it is carried out without the use of oxygen, it is called anaerobic respiration. So breakdown of pyruvate using oxygen takes place in mitochondria. Aerobic respiration breaks up 3-carbon pyruvate molecule to give 3 molecules of carbon dioxide and the other product is water. The release of energy in aerobic process is a lot greater than in anaerobic process. Sometimes when there is a lack of oxygen in our muscle cells, another pathway for the breakdown of pyruvate is taken. Here, pyruvate is converted into lactic acid, which is also a 3-carbon molecule. This buildup of lactic acid in our muscles during sudden activity causes cramps. So energy released during cellular respiration is immediately used to synthesize a molecule called ATP, which is used to fuel all other activities in the cell. That is adenosine diphosphate with a phosphate that creates adenosine triphosphate or ATP. It is also known as the energy coin of our body. In plants, exchange of gases takes place through stomata and large intercellular space that ensures that all cells are in contact with the air. The carbon dioxide and oxygen are exchanged by diffusion here. The direction of diffusion depends upon the environmental conditions and requirement of the plant. So at night, carbon dioxide exchange is a major exchange activity, and during the day, oxygen release is the major event. So let's come into animals. In terrestrial animals, they can breathe in oxygen from the atmosphere, but animals that live in water need to use the oxygen dissolved in water. Since the amount of dissolved oxygen is fairly low compared to the amount of oxygen in air, the rate of breathing in aquatic animals is a lot faster than one seen in the terrestrial organisms. So let's take the case of fish. Fish take in water through their mouths and force it past their gills where the dissolved oxygen is taken up by the blood. So what happens in human beings? Air is taken in the body through the nostrils where air is filtered by fine hairs and mucus lining the mucal passage. From here, the air passes through the throat into the lungs and there are rings of cartilage present to ensure that the air passage doesn't collapse. So this is the air passage and it is made of very small muscles. So to ensure that this doesn't collapse, there are rings of cartilage which are kind of bones which support the structure. Within lungs, passage divides into smaller and smaller tubes which finally terminate in alveoli. So you can see the balloon-like structures, these are known as alveoli. These provide a surface where the exchange of gases can take place. The walls of alveoli contains an extensive network of blood vessels. So these are surrounded by blood vessels, and here the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen takes place. So when we breathe in, we lift up our ribs, flatten our diaphragm, and now we have the chest cavity becoming larger. So what happens? The air is sucked into the lungs and fills the expanded alveoli. And so exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen takes place here. So when we breathe out, the reverse process takes place. The ribs come back, diaphragm arcs, and the chest cavity becomes smaller, pushing the air out. During breathing cycle, when air is taken in and let out, the lungs always remain a residual volume of air so that there is sufficient time for the oxygen to be absorbed and for the carbon dioxide to be released. So when the size of animals is large, diffusion pressure cannot ensure that the oxygen delivery is taken to all parts of the body. Instead, respiratory pigments take up oxygen from air in the lungs and carry it to tissues which are deficient in oxygen before releasing it. So, in humans, the respiratory pigment is hemoglobin, which gives the blood its red color. So, you can see the cramps which are formed while running. That is because of the development of the lactic acid due to anaerobic respiration, anaerobic synthesis of lactic acid. Now we move into transportation. So transportation means moving substances like oxygen and nutrients and water within the body. Why is this essential? Because food and oxygen are taken up at one place in our body and is needed to be transported to other parts as well. So in our body, the major transporting fluid is blood, which consists of a fluid medium called plasma. So what does plasma do? It transports food, carbon dioxide, and other nitrogenous waste in dissolved form. RBC, that is the red blood corpuscles, carry oxygen and substances like salt. A pumping organ is required to push the blood around the body, and a network of tubes to reach all the tissues, and a system to ensure that this network can be repaired if damaged. So what is the pumping organ in our body? It is the heart. What is a heart? It is a muscular organ which is only as big as our fist. Both oxygen and carbon dioxide have to be transported by the blood. So in order to facilitate this, heart has different chambers. So these chambers ensure to prevent the oxygen rich blood from mixing with the blood containing carbon dioxide. So we'll see that process in short while. Oxygen rich blood from the lungs come to the thin-walled upper chamber of heart on the left called the left atrium. So this is the left atrium and it receives good blood from the lungs. The upper chambers are called atrium and the lower chambers are called ventricle. The left atrium releases when it is collecting this blood and then contracts while the next chamber, the left ventricle, relaxes so that the blood is transferred to it. When muscular left ventricle contracts in its turn, the blood is pumped out to the body. Deoxygenated blood comes from the body to the upper chamber on the right atrium, as it relaxes. As the right atrium contracts, the corresponding lower chamber, the right ventricle, which in turn the right ventricle dilates. This transfers blood to the right ventricle, which in turn pumps it to lungs for oxygenating. Since ventricles have to pump blood into various organs, they have thicker muscle walls than the atrium. Valves are present along to ensure that blood does not flow backwards when the atria or ventricles contract. See here, the blood flows through the heart twice. And such kind of circulation where we have the blood flowing in twice is called double circulation. So let's see the case in animals like amphibians or reptiles. They have only three-chambered hearts, and they do tolerate some mixing of the oxygenated and the deoxygenated blood. But what about fish? Fish, on the other hand, has only two chambers to their hearts, and blood is pumped to the gills, oxygenated there, and passes directly to the rest of the body. So, arteries with thick elastic walls carry blood away from the heart to various organs of the body through capillaries. Veins collect the blood from different organs of the body and bring it back to the heart. They have valves that ensure that blood flows in only one direction. These valves are very essential in order to separate between the oxygenated and the deoxygenated blood, or else mixing of those can happen. Now let's come into the fluid blood. We already discussed that blood has a component called plasma. What else does it contain? It also contains another cell called platelet cells, which circulate around the body and takes care of the leaks by clotting the blood at points of injury or cut. So, through the pores present in the walls of capillaries, some amount of plasma, proteins, and blood cells escape into the intercellular spaces in tissues, and these form the tissue fluid or lymph. The lymph is colorless. Okay? So, what are lymphs? Lymph drains into the lymphatic capillaries from intercellular space, which join to form large lymph vessels that finally open into the larger veins. So, the basic function of lymph is the waste management. So, lymph also carries digested and absorbed fat from the intestine and drains excess fluid from extracellular space back into the blood. So this is how the transportation of blood in humans work. Let's see how it takes place in plants. In transportation in plants. Plants do not move, and plant bodies have a large proportion of dead cells in many tissues and so have lower energy needs. So it is acceptable to have a relatively slow transportation system in plants. Plant transportation systems will move energy stores from the leaves and raw materials from the roots. The two pathways are constructed as independently organized conducting tubes. In xylem tissue, the vessels and tracheids of the roots, stems, and the leaves are interconnected to form a continuous system of water conducting channels reaching all parts of the plants. And what we have to remember, it is unidirectional. That is, it flows only from the roots to all other parts of the plants and not vice versa. So during day, what happens? Water is transported from the roots using the ion concentration difference, pressure, and transpiration. So we'll discuss these two terms, that is ion concentration difference, pressure, and transpiration. So what is transpiration? Evaporation of water molecules from the cells of a leaf through stomata creates a suction which pulls water in from the xylem cells of roots. It also helps in temperature regulation. So the process of evaporation of water molecules through the cells of stomata is called transpiration. So now let's come into ion difference concentration. So it creates a root pressure. How does it create? At the root cells which are in contact with the soil, it actively takes up ions. So when it takes up ions, it creates a difference in concentration of the ions between the root and the soil. Therefore, water moves into the root from the soil to eliminate the difference. And that's how that pressure helps in the suction of water. Now, in the night, only the effect of root pressure or the ion difference root pressure is there for the transportation of water, as transpiration cannot take place in night. So now let's discuss about the transportation of food in plants. So transport of soluble products and photosynthesis is called translocation. Translocation is an energy demanding process and it occurs in the part of vascular tissue which is known as phloem. Translocation takes place in sieve tubes with the help of adjacent companion cells both in the upward and the downward directions. So it is bidirectional process. So materials like sucrose is transferred from phloem tissue using energy from ATP. So this increases the osmotic pressure of tissue, causing water to move into it. This pressure moves the material in the phloem to tissues which have less pressure. So we have already said that the direction of food movement is bidirectional. For example, leaves prepare the food and then they transport it to all the parts of the body. Let's say in spring, when the activity is less, this stored food from rest of the parts move to essential parts of the body which are carrying on several other processes. So now let's come into the last process which is known as excretion. So when chemical reactions use carbon sources and oxygen for energy generation, they also create byproducts such as nitrogenous waste that are not only harmful but also needs to be removed from the body and discarded outside. So this happens via a process known as excretion. So again, coming into unicellular organisms, right? They remove these waste by simple diffusion from the body surface into the surrounding. Whereas in humans, we have a dedicated organ system for that, which is known as the excretory system. The excretory system consists of a pair of kidneys, a pair of ureters, and a urinary bladder and a urethra. So the kidneys are located in the abdomen, one on either side of the backbone. Urine placed in kidneys passes through the ureters and into the urinary bladder where it is stored until it is released through the urethra. Nitrogenous waste such as urea or uric acid are removed from the blood in kidneys. So each kidney has a large number of filtration units called nephrons. So the nephrons contain something known as the Bowman's capsule and the coiling of several tubes from where it releases into the duct. So we'll discuss each of these parts one by one. The basic filtration unit in kidneys is a cluster of very thin walled blood capillaries. So we have a lot of blood capillaries here where the nitrogenous waste flow from the blood into the Bowman's capsule. So each of these capillaries is associated with the cup-shaped end called the Bowman's capsule, which terminates in coil-shaped structure. It collects a filtrate and the process of filtration continues. So some substances in the initial filtrate, such as the glucose, amino acid, salts, and a major amount of water are selectively reabsorbed as urine flows through the tube. And rest of it is sent to the urinary bladder via the ureters. Now let's discuss what happens in plants. Oxygen is a waste product generated during photosynthesis. Gaseous removal takes place through the stomata. We have discussed this point earlier in respiration as well. Excess water is got ridden by transpiration. For other waste, plants use the fact that many of their tissues are dead cells. If you observe the bark, you can see several dead cells. And some plant waste are stored in the cell vacuoles. Waste products may also be stored in the leaves that fall off. Other waste products are stored as resins or gums, especially in the old xylem. Plants also excrete some waste substance into the soil around them. So this is how excretion takes place in plants. So now if we come into the quick recap of what we have done so far. Nutrition is a process where food intake and energy release happens. And respiration is a process where energy is released from food. And transportation is the internal movement of substances. which takes place via blood in humans. And excretion is the removal of body waste. In humans, it is urine passage. All right, with this, we come to the end of the summary of the chapter. Now, let's discuss some basic question and answers. So, first question we are going to discuss is what is the role of diaphragm in respiration? It helps in the inhalation and exhalation. Now, let's come to the next question. Which part of nephron filters the blood? It is glomerulus. And now, which enzyme is present in saliva? It is the salivary amylase. Next question. What is the function of xylem in plants? Transport of water and minerals. Now, last question. What is the end product of digestion of carbohydrates? It is glucose. Life processes are all about keeping living beings alive, balanced, and functional. Master this chapter, and you are one step closer to scoring full marks in biology. So, one tip which I have to provide is draw diagrams, practice definitions, and use real life examples in your answers. These are the exercises from NCERT. We'll do that as well. The kidneys in human beings are a part of the system for excretion. The xylem in plants are responsible for transport of water. We also discussed that it is unidirectional. The autotrophic mode of nutrition requires carbon dioxide, water, sunlight, chlorophyll. So it is all of the above. The breakdown of pyruvate to give carbon dioxide, water, and energy takes place in mitochondria. This is the example of an aerobic respiration, and this takes place in the mitochondria. So now there is a bonus question for you to solve. The energy reserve of plants is task. So what is the energy reserve of energy in humans? Comment the answer below in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Leave a comment below if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos. I'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Learnwizz and click the bell icon so you never miss an update. Also, follow the Learnwizz at social medias Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for amazing tips and tricks. Stay curious, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.